Hello, my name's Pastor Brett Kennett, and I'm the pastor for Congregational Support for the Lutheran Church of Australia, Victoria, Tasmania District. Recently, I had a conversation with Pastor Peter Ghalayini and Peter Renner from the Ringwood Knox congregation here in suburban Melbourne. Pastor Peter's the pastor, obviously, and Peter Renner's the chair of the Ringwood congregation and of the parish. And Ringwood Knox have been on a journey of revitalisation for a number of years now. They've taken time to do this, and that journey's had several phases. When Pastor Peter joined me from Melbourne here and Peter Renner joined me from Port Douglas via Zoom, we had a great discussion about what they've experienced and what they've learned so far. I asked Peter Renner to kick off by describing how it all began.
At Ringwood, we had noted back in 2018-19 that we probably couldn't continue to do the same things and expect different results. We'd had some major expense with our building, which is, in fact, it's celebrating its 60th anniversary next month in October. But our building needed a lot of maintenance work, expensive maintenance work. And whilst we had the capacity to pay for that without getting any loans or whatever, we just realised that we as a congregation were ageing, and so is our building. And it behoved us to, I think, as leadership, to try and address those issues and understand how we could address them, how we could potentially rejuvenate ourselves. And as we were doing that, the Eastern Region Review, auspiced by the district, was convened, and we became part of that. I suppose we were very comfortable to be involved in that, but we were probably a little bit ahead of the curve with the other congregations because we had come to realise at leadership level and at some membership level that we couldn't continue to do the same things. So we were happy to contribute, obviously, but we were also happy to continue our own journey. And the district engaged a former pastor of the, I think, Church of Christ, Phil McCredden, as a consultant for the ERR. And I think that the members of our group who attended those ERR sessions were quite impressed with the way that he went about bringing the audience with him in terms of the need for change. Hasn't got the answers, but it was all about saying, hey, if we are stuck in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s, we were operating in those days with a church that was central to the life in general in the community, but we're now post-Christendom. Things have changed so much that we can't expect people to just walk through the door. So those sessions that we had with Phil and with you and with Bishop Lester and other congregations brought us to a position to at least explore the opportunity of having Phil work with us, which he did. For about 3 or 4 sessions with 8 members of our leadership teams at Knox and at Ringwood, together with Pastor. So there were 9 of us, and he took us on a journey. And then he also had sessions with our members. Our members were invited to 4 different sessions to go through at a less deep level with our members the need for change. Where were we in society, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the genesis of it all, and that's how we came to work with Phil. Phil gave us an interim report, which consisted of all of the feedback from our members. We had something like, I think, 50 or 60 members of our parish contribute to that. And then he met with us again to distill that information that he'd produced, and then he came up with a final report that we shared together with him and then individually. So that was the journey with Phil McCredden, and that's about all that I'd say on that now. We can go further, but I'd just like Pastor Pete to also contribute if you can in terms of anything that I might have missed. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I think you've covered it comprehensively. I can't think of anything to add other than I guess, yeah, we had the sessions with Phil, and we also identified that we really need our young people to have a voice. So Phil also met intentionally with a group of our young people as well. So we really saw that this wasn't just for the more experienced members, but rather we wanted our youth to have a voice in it. Well, we had a good turn up to that as well. So yeah, Phil had a pretty good understanding of who he needed to talk to, and yeah.
So then maybe just to go a little further, Pastor Brett, we then had a meeting. Phil had recommended about 4 or 5 different opportunities for us, but he, as he kept saying to us, it's not he with the answer, it's us.
Yeah.
And he was encouraging us to spin off some little initiatives, some bold moves to step out in faith. Was also talking to us about potentially having more members of our congregation, not just the leadership team, involved in further work with Phil. We opted ultimately against that at that stage because we felt that we would like to go back to the district, to yourself and to Pastor Nathan, to have a look at what resources we could use at the district level rather than an external consultant. And we determined that from this review, I suppose in the very, very early days in 2018, when we were starting to pay out a lot of money on maintenance and so on, it was all about our church and our building and our footprint, if you like. And over this journey that we've been on, it's become more apparent to the members of the team that have been involved in this that it's about mission and ministry. We can't expect to knock down our building and put up a new one and everyone's going to come. I mean, that's very wishful thinking, and we don't believe the right way to go about it. It's about local mission and ministry, and that's why we approached you and Pastor Nathan as the Minister for New and Renewing Churches, because we're at a stage, I think, of needing to be renewing. But it's about the future. And the future is not just opening the doors and expecting people to come in. It's about being intentional. And that's why we approached Pastor Nathan, and he said that he'd love to work with us. And he has had 3 sessions with us now in terms of a way forward. And he's at the stage now of talking with us about now going to a congregational setting or a parish setting to talk about talents with our members, talents or gifts in terms of what they might be interested to do. And all of this is in the framework of the strategic plan that the LCA put together about 8 years ago, and that was about grow, go and enable. And what he's looking for us to do is to, if we can, discern where we might best fit in terms of those three go words, if you like. So that's sort of the next step where we're at. We decided after Phil that, yes, it was an awakening and it was awareness, and it was, yes, no more sitting on our hands. If we're going to be going forward, we do that in prayer, and we do it with an intentional approach. And that's what we're now going to do. We've got no idea what the outcome will be. We're not that far down the path. It's only a start. We know many of our members are anxious for action. Why aren't we doing something? There's so much talking, nothing is ever happening. I think it was you, Brett, who said to us, you came up with that famous variation of that saying that don't just do something, sit there or think about it or whatever. So we're still at that stage. We're not rushing forward with any kind of preconceived idea of what we're going to do. And we know that we can't do it alone. We need to do it with the Holy Spirit's guidance. We need to do it with our pastor. We needed to do it with our leadership. And we needed to do it with the members of the district, because after all, the district is there to give us that support. So that's where we're at this stage. So we can't give you any great feedback in terms of we've got people streaming through the doors and, all is well in the world. We're not there anywhere near that yet. But we plan as the next step. I mentioned our Silver Jubilee, I think, didn't I? Or the fact that the church is 60 years old. We've got a celebration of that towards the end of October, where we'll talk about this with members, but the plan would be then probably in November that Pastor Nathan would meet with our congregations to discuss the next steps in a broader context.
One of the fruits of the Spirit is patience, isn't it? The Holy Spirit gives, and I think that's the big learning for me, that phrase, don't just do something, but sit there. I've learned that from wiser heads than myself in relatively recent times, because I can remember my own experience of being in parish ministry and the anxiousness that I felt as a pastor just to do something, anything, but it was usually something we'd done before. And Peter, you said at the beginning that that's not cutting it anymore, is it? The old notion of build it and they will come. It was an appropriate strategy a generation or so ago, but it's not cutting it anymore. So the time you've taken to reflect and really do that, it's hard work, slow work, but the time you've taken to do that, I think will bear fruit. What would you say was the advantages, and maybe there were disadvantages too, of having an external consultant, someone like Phil, come in for that first phase?
Going back to ERR, I think maybe you and I might have had a chat about that in the early days, Pastor Brett, that we Lutherans are funny creatures. We're probably, in fact, as Lutherans, I don't think evangelism is at the top of the list in terms of what we do, or maybe even sharing or recognising where we are on the journey. And it became, I think, clear to Pastor Pete and myself that some of our congregations, the members sitting around ERR, were probably not recognising the situation as closely or as clearly as others. And I felt it helped to actually take our leadership, our LCA district leadership, out of the equation, to have someone with no vested interest, if you like, come into the picture. Obviously a Christian, a former minister of the Churches of Christ, had been on the journey, could tell it as it is, could ask probing questions without fear or favour, without alienating anyone. I think it was necessary to do that, just to be able to distance ourselves and to learn from someone else. So I think that was the start of my thinking, at least, that we could do the same thing for Ringwood and Knox.
The fresh set of eyes from outside.
And not only that, he could challenge us more than someone from within, from within the tent, if you like.
Yep.
So I felt that was very, very useful, and it was all about a mind shift. I mean, we talked about things like first level, second level, third level thinking. And not a lot of people I would have thought have heard about third level thinking. So it's about challenging people. It's not just doing things right or then doing the right things. It's getting further into, what is the issue and how can we address it in a different way? How do we reinvent it rather than just tinker with it? And that kind of methodology was what Phil shared with us, which I thought opened a number of our members' eyes to say, hey, it's not just as simple as ABC. We've got to get down to the X, Y, Zs if we're going to get to where we want to be.
And also, I forgot the opposite term of what's the opposite to adaptive thinking, Brett?
And technical.
Technical. So a lot of our folk were really focused on the technical solution. You know, if we sold some of our property or sold one of our premises, you know, we'd have this money to build something, and then, you know, that would solve all our problems. But as Pete said, we realised it was deeper than that. We had to have a reason for building something new or whatever. So it was that adaptive thinking that of looking afresh at, you know, who we are, who is our neighbour, and what are we here for. So I think having an outside consultant could could help us to look beyond just the, you know, sell the farm and, you know, and all our money worries would be over, and then, you know, and that would be it, and sit comfortably. So I think the outside consultant helped us to look beyond that.
Yeah, I agree, Pastor. And at the same time then, the next step from that was then to bring that back into the Lutheran community with the tools that they had established, namely go, grow and enable.
Yeah.
Therefore, to put that back in the context of what the church has developed, we've had a new and renewing churches ministry now for some time across the LCA. Pastor Nathan is fairly new at it in the last 12 months or so. But why would we not want to use someone who's been down that path and has understood how he can take us down that path using those tools that have been developed across the LCA for a number of years. We're not the font of all wisdom, that's for sure. And so therefore, we are synodical, and we do wish to be able to use the resources of the church. And that was why we came back ultimately. Not that we'd ever left, but we just felt it was a good idea to break away and have someone outside of the tent, that is the LCA tent, to help us on that journey.
Yeah.
Thank you. My thanks to you both again. To those who may be watching this video later, and congregational leaders and pastors who might be considering the sort of process you've described, what would you say? What advice would you give thinking of going down this road?
Well, I think first of all, leadership has to understand where they are at a point of time. Are they still growing? Are they? Do they have momentum? Are they attracting new members from the community? Is it vibrant? Is it growing? Or is it starting to shrink? And I think the first thing is a recognition. Where are we? Who are we? And where are we in the cycle of a growing church, or a maturing church, or a declining church? Where in that cycle are we? And how might we then address it? And have we tried to address it before, and has it failed? Do we need to think differently in terms of how this goes? A number of our congregations across the LCA, I know, with shrinking membership, have been forced or encouraged to merge and become parishes. That might help in some respects. I don't think it's the whole answer. It might help with the shrinking number of pastors that we've got, to make sure that we've got the best coverage of our pastors, because it used to be 40 years ago that a pastor probably had a flock of 160 to 250, depending on where they were. Now we don't have congregations of that number. So a way of addressing that might be first or second level thinking, which is let's bring them together so we've got 150 or 200 again. That might cover off on one, on the scarcity of pastors, but I don't know whether it absolutely addresses the question of evangelism and growth in the way that potentially it could be done. And I'm not here to say this is the way it's done, because as Phil McCredden said to us, what might have worked in one spot's not necessarily going to work in another, and that's for you to define. That's what you do as leaders, and that's what I would encourage any leader who might be listening to this to be thinking, okay, where are we in that cycle, and how do we go forward? And yeah, I just encourage them, first of all, to stop, to pray, to think, and then maybe to just work out where they are and do they need to change? And if so, how do they engage in that change process?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if I could just add too, I think an important part for us in this, just sitting back and reflecting is to work out who you are. I think Pete mentioned before, we're not the same church that we were, 10, 20, 30 years ago. We are so, it's easy to fall in the, looking back, remember the days when we had, 40, 50 children at Sunday school. I remember when our pews were filled, and thinking along those, the old Israelites wanting to go back to Egypt, scenario, that's not who we are. So it's, part of it is identity, working out who you are, and not looking at other churches and what they're doing, and if only we could replicate what they're doing, we'll have the same results. That's not what we're called to do. And I think God has placed us in a particular area with our particular membership for a reason. And I think part of that process is reflecting on who you are and working out, what strengths, God has given you, and what opportunities, for mission and ministry. And I think that's what Phil helped us to go through as well. And now Pastor Nathan Heck is now taking us on that next next journey in the in our review.
So, Pastor Brett, we call our journey Cultivating a New Future. We're deliberately using the term cultivating because that means preparing the way. A lot of our background, of course, for the Lutheran Church in Australia has been in rural areas, and many of our folk understand the analogy of using that metaphor. So we're cultivating. We haven't started sowing yet. We've cleared the ground maybe, and now we've got the cultivator going, but we haven't started to plant, and we haven't started necessarily to see any growth, and definitely not any reaping. So it's very, very early stages. So, but hopefully our membership can relate to that term, cultivating, and be with us as we prepare the ground and as we plant the seed.
I think you're reminding me of St. Paul's words, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. And so you're planting carefully, you're watering, you're cultivating. And I'm excited to think what's going to come of this. And I'm heartened. I'd like you to come back in due course and for us to have another conversation. And it's only relatively early days with Pastor Nathan, but I'd like to have a chat with you, if you wouldn't mind, in a few months or so we can hear how that's unfolding, that next stage of the cultivation journey.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, yeah. Thanks to you both for sharing this information, and we're all learning a lot. I'm learning to do these video blogs. Thanks for sharing what you're learning with us all, and God's blessings for the next phase of the journey.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pastor Brett.